It really is about creating conversations. Arrow.net, ARROE.net. All right, let's do it. Let's podcast. Episode number 147 is with Wil Fulton from the podcast Thrillist Explorers.
Hey, Arrow, what's going on? How are you?
Fantastic. I'll tell you what, your podcast is everything that I tried to promote to the different universities that bring me in to talk about podcasting and broadcasting and stuff like that. But you take people places. And isn't that really what all of this is about?
Oh my God, it so is. Like that's, you got to hit the nail on the head. And that's what's really different about this season. We're actually taking people to these cities. We're on the road and we're on the streets. So that is definitely what we try to cultivate over here.
Well, I'll tell you what, I sure love the way that the very second that you start the podcast with Oklahoma City, you challenge us as listeners to listen to the sound. What do you hear? And when is the last time that we heard somebody through those speakers give us the opportunity to participate with something like that by listening?
I love that you call that out. That's great. That's very cool. I mean, like it is, we try to be people engaged. My background as a writer, and I would sometimes use those tricks, this kind of like, like put a question out there and try to challenge people's preconceived notions. So that's always super important to me, especially with a place like Oklahoma City, where I think it's just severely underrated as a travel destination and as a city in general.
Well, I mean, I didn't know they were such open people there. I just did not know. And the festival and stuff like that they put on, this is the kind of stuff that everybody around this country needs to know.
I agree. And it honestly blew my mind too, Arrow. When I went there, I remember someone kind of gave us a tip, a writer that was featured on the show, Matt Kerouac, and he was talking about how progressive it is and, all this stuff about 39th Street and the district. And I had no idea. And even when I went there, it just blew my mind. It really did. Because it's in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma City. You get there, red state, conservative state, and it's just this oasis for queer folks. So amazing. And
it just, because, you think of San Francisco, you think of New York, you think of the openness in all these other cities. But Oklahoma City, to me, was that place that had KOMA when I was a kid, and it used to broadcast up into Montana. I always wanted to go there. And now that, it just shows that, look, we are an open forum of people.
Yes. And you know what? And even beyond the LGBTQ stuff, the restaurants there, the bars there, the neighborhoods, the shops, just everything, even just aesthetically, the city is beautiful. It is just such like a great place. It has a great quality of life. I think I said this, but I'm coming from New York, and it was just like literally a breath of fresh air for me.
You got the opportunity to sit down and talk with Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. I mean, dude, to have that opportunity to tap into their imagination, and in reality, to listeners, they need to understand that they themselves are on a journey, and you got to be a part of that. Yeah,
that was an interesting one. I've always loved what Ken Burns does. I mean, I grew up watching his baseball documentary, which is so amazing. I still turn it on from time to time. What was interesting about that is they were also focused on someone I love. Their journey was discovering Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's life, who notorious world traveler himself. So it was kind of this confluence of interest for me. Not only are we talking to Ken and Lynn, who are my own personal heroes, but we're talking about a personal hero of theirs and of mine, Ernest Hemingway. So it's just all of this great stuff. I mean, that was one I was actually kind of nervous for, Arrow. I'm not going to lie, talking to Ken Burns.
But you know what? It opened up my writing imagination in the way that I'm going, wait a second, that Hemingway, yes, he wrote in all these places, but you openly talk about it, which creates the conversation, which allows the imagination to be ignited by things. I mean, do you see the process? It's like the seed that becomes the tree, which becomes the paper. That's what you're bringing to this podcast.
Yeah, and I do think, just to reiterate that, I think it's really, I started as a writer. I did not start as, a radio host like yourself. I started writing articles, making narratives. And I think that storytelling aspect is one thing that sets our show apart from other travel shows. We're not just going to Oklahoma City, for example, and being like, here's 10 things to do. We're telling a story of a subculture in that city and then trying to challenge people's expectations a little bit. So, that really is what we're trying to do here.
You're so right about that, about writers versus people who are on the radio who are trying to podcast, because it took me a long time to go through the evolution of becoming that storyteller. And yet when you do the history on podcasting, it didn't start from radio people and comedians. It was writers that started podcasting. They started the journey, and you're just right there, right along with them.
Most definitely it is, and you look at different publications and brands from the New York Times to a place like Thrillist, and they're all putting their writers on podcasts because it is such a great medium to expand and grow the stories that we tell every day. I mean, it's one thing to write a story and quote someone, and it's just an entirely different thing to actually hear their voice and hear the passion and hear those things that are sometimes ineffable in writing, right? And you actually get to hear them, and that's really the beauty, in my mind, of podcasts.
Well, I love the way that you go into different regions and stuff like that, because I'm sure there's people up in Seattle or even Butte, Montana, that have no idea what a Waffle House is, but you did a podcast on Waffle Houses. I'm here in Carolina, man. I know exactly what a Waffle House is and how thin that T-bone steak is when you go in there at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. So I grew up in the Northeast. We traveled a lot down south, and it was such a tradition for us to stop at a Waffle House, my family, every time. And I kind of grew up loving it. And as I got older, I kind of realized the reputation it might have for a late night hangout. Like sometimes it gets pretty wild there. So yeah, as soon as we started doing a travel show, that was one episode where I was like, we have to dedicate an episode to Waffle House, telling the stories, talking about its history and all of the quirky, weird, oftentimes wild things that happen there.
Well, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe it was a Waffle House here in the Carolinas that Kid Rock got arrested in because a little scuffle took place. You go into a Waffle House expecting this kind of stuff.
You do. It's part of it. It's honestly like the chaos is just as important as the scrambled eggs at a Waffle House. And I think that episode proved it. But, I do want to say the corporate entity of Waffle House, they do a lot of really great stuff, especially, big part of that episode was talking about how they're always the first places to open after a natural disaster and taking care of the community. And that was really cool, too, because we have the funny stories about, the drunk guy that came in and cooked his own eggs because no one else was working. But we also talk about, some of the great things they do. And we don't get that sentimental on our show, or, sometimes we do. But it actually surprised me. And I was like, they do pretty cool things in the communities where they're based. They really do.
Somewhere along the line, though, you've got to get with Guy and Sammy Hagar and go have a midnight dinner at the Waffle House. Because, I mean, I just would love to see that conversation or hear it on your podcast.
Yeah, we've talked to those guys a couple times. I'm a big fan of Guy Fieri and Sammy Hagar too, obviously. And I have to say, we do talk to some famous people from time to time, and those guys are just so down to earth, so fun, and they're best friends too, like themselves, and that just totally shows. I mean, you cannot meet two nicer guys than those two.
Speaking of nice people, I like the way that whoever is working with you, creating your podcast and stuff like that with you, you allow people like Atlas and Joshua to come on to talk about their app. Because that's, people don't do that kind of stuff, but you say, yeah, I do. We're going to talk about their app in New Jersey.
Yeah, that's interesting you brought that up, Arrow, because in some ways, Atlas Obscura is a competitor of Thrillist, right? They kind of do something similar. And when I pitched that idea to my bosses, really, it was kind of like, hey, I know that we're like kind of advertising a competitor here. However, they do great things and we do great things. Let's have them on and talk about where we overlap and what their vision of travel in the future is. And I think that's just like so important. It's not a competition between us. It's about like working together and figure out how we can make this industry a little bit better and how we can like make people excited about traveling again. So I was all for it. I'm big fans of Atlas and they're big fans of us. So little crossover episode there, right? In sitcoms they used to do that, right?
Well, that's what I've always loved about podcasters in general. It's not like the egos of radio people where, you've got to use that guerrilla warfare and stuff like that in order to beat them in the ratings. But podcasters tend to cross-pollinate very, very nicely.
Yeah, and you kind of have to. It's a great way to promote what we do and promote what they do. And you don't seem like you have that big of an ego, Arrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you seem good. Yeah.
Well, it's because I want everybody to win. That's one of the things that I was that jock that was on the air that wouldn't do radio contests, and I really struggled because I didn't want to give away $1,000. And they would go, why? And I go, because I have one winner and 99,000 losers. I don't want to do that to 99,000 people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you just said that. Maybe we should do some type of contest. I don't know. That sounds interesting. Now I'm thinking like that might be a good idea for us.
Now let's break it down. Now you say that Austin has got a pretty good breakfast taco. Now come on now, what would make their tacos better than what we have here in Carolina?
Well, I think that's a very so that kind of question. It's the same thing as why are the bagels quote unquote better in New York? Why is the sushi better in LA? And I think it's a lot of things. I think it mainly stems from the tradition of making them there. Let's take Austin breakfast tacos, or let's even take Brooklyn bagels, because that's where I'm from, and I know that a little bit more. It's like people know how to make it. They're trained how to make it by people who were trained that go back generations and generations. They just know how to do it. It's not some secret ingredient. It's not some like weird, wild method. It's a lot of practice, and it's learning from people who have learned from people who have been doing this for years. It is really just the tradition. It's going to be hard unless somebody moves from Austin who has been making breakfast tacos for 50 years to Charlotte and opens up a place. It's going to be hard to get that type of quality and tradition in a different city. And that's really that's what it is. You'll see it happen sometimes, but on the whole, it's just like you can go 24 places in Austin and probably get the best breakfast taco of your life. That's just the culture there.
You're so right about that when it comes to different restaurants and stuff like that. In-N-Out burgers are totally LA, California, but I really don't think it would work in Carolina because, I think Chick-fil-A just dominates this area.
Right, exactly. And even using the fast food analog, you're right. It's taste, and it's just like, it's how they run their business too. Yeah. Man, do you ever feel like a rock star when you go into these cities and wonder, what city am I in today? I totally don't know because I've been everywhere. I do and I don't. You might have this too, but a lot of times when I'm in a city, I'm a little bit stressed because I'm there for work, and maybe we do a lot of coverage of bars, and sometimes I'll have a drink and then I'll feel a little bit less stressed. And maybe that is when that feeling kicks in, but yeah, it is sometimes. Sometimes we will do something where we go to a city back to back and we'll only spend like one night there and we'll just record the entire time. And it definitely starts to blur together. It becomes kind of a whirlwind, but it is always fun. I always leave thinking, that was a blast. And as long as that continues, I think like our show will be in good shape.
So what kind of discipline do you go through? Because I did a lecture on Monday, and that was one of the main things that I really put into these students that are growing toward podcasting is that you have got to have a daily discipline of how many hours that you can put into it. Otherwise, you're going to be in that studio for 18 hours, and then you're going to get burnout.
Definitely. It's being in the studio is one thing. Being out field recording, I think like the best advice, and it's hard to do. It's just like always be recording. And that's where the best discipline comes in. Like you just always have to be recording. Record everything wherever you go. Because you listen to the show obviously, Arrow, and you know that we include a lot of kind of like not so much behind the scenes, but kind of everyday stuff. People talking about random stuff. Yep. People like putting on their microphones and small talking. And honestly, like that is some of the best stuff that we capture because people's guards are down and they're a little bit more natural. So, you just have to always, even though it's uncomfortable and even though it's hard and it's a lot of effort, just always be recording. Try to capture everything because then you can go through it all later and get what you want. You can't go back. You can't go back to the city that you were in. You can, but it's not, my company's not going to pay for that. So. Oh,
you're so right about that.
You got to always be recording.
You're so right about that, about recording devices and stuff like that, because I've got Zooms with me at all time. And I've also got, just everything. I can, if somebody were to walk in front of me right now, the goal is to get that conversation. And it's just who we are as podcasters. And I don't even want to, because that cheapens what we do. It's who we are as storytellers, that we just want to capture the moment.
Definitely. And that's so important. It's also making the people that you're talking to feel comfortable and, trying to get their story out, really, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell their story and put it into this great medium.
So how many meetings did you have to go through to get the story out about hotels being the best place for sex?
That was a pretty quick sell to my bosses, and
really,
we found. Oh, yeah, it was, because when you raise that question, a lot of people are like, you get two reactions. You're either like, I don't think that's true, or a lot of people are like, oh my God, yeah, I never really even thought about that, but you're totally right. So we found a sex therapist pretty soon that was like definitely willing and able to talk about that, kind of going through the machinations and the the psychology of it. And I mean, if you listen to the episode, it kind of boils down to you're not in your house. You're not worried about the cobweb in the corner of your ceiling. You're not worried about, you're not like looking over and seeing your work computer. You're in an entirely different place. You're usually on vacation. And that just lets you relax a little bit more and lets your inhibitions down.
Yeah, and most of those hotels nowadays, when you step into the bigger ones, they've got garden tubs and all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, it totally sets you up for your own little personal porn.
It does. And, you know, a lot of boutique and luxury hotels, they'll even have like little packages on the minibar. I don't know if you've seen this, where they have like lube and condoms and sometimes even vibrators. So, I mean, they're setting, they know what business they're in, right? And they're just setting people up for that.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was with the different regions of food and stuff like that. My wife is from Chicago, and she's always talking about the beef and stuff like that, the Italian beef. And then when I get with people from Chicago, they have no idea what she's talking about. But yeah, so did you run through the same thing when it came to finding the best cheesesteak in Philly? Because, I mean, if I go to Philly, I got to have the cheesesteak, but I would hate to go up there and people go, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, well, you know, the interesting thing about cheesesteaks is you can definitely go anywhere in America and really almost anywhere in the world. And if you go to like a pizza shop, a kebab shop, places like that, a lot of them have cheesesteaks. So it is kind of this ubiquitous thing. But in Philly, it is just so different. I mean, this is religion to people there. They will fight you. They will scream in your face about their favorite cheesesteak spot. And, you know, you mentioned, you know, the best and things like that. And also in that episode, we wanted to kind of think about what we, as Thrillist, who does a lot of that stuff, you know, we talk about what is the best Chicago dog in Chicago, what's the best pizza in New York. What does best even mean when it comes to food? Because it's such a subjective, arbitrary thing. So all that was kind of folded in. And the takeaway is, you know, kind of going back even to the breakfast taco and Austin thing, cheesesteaks really are better in Philadelphia. It's hard to explain. It's wild, but it's just like they are so good there. There's so much love and tradition put into those sandwiches. In
a very victorious way, don't you think that what you do on your podcast is that you use the new texture in order to help paint the picture? In other words, you know, the perfectionist listeners don't want the perfect studio. They want to actually feel what it is that you're going through.
Yeah, yes. And that's really important to me, actually. Like, you know, we try to own our mistakes, right? I think that at one part in that cheesesteak episode, I was taste testing something holding a microphone and I dropped it, or it turned off. It turned off because I was so into it. And we just kind of owned that. We were like, hey, there's a big gap here because I was so excited I turned my mic off, but here we're coming back in. And that, to me, you know, that's what I like to see when I'm watching documentaries, when I'm listening to stuff like this. It's like nobody's perfect, and sometimes a really polished product even kind of turns me off because it doesn't seem real. It seems artificial. So we definitely try to go for that.
Do you ever have one of those challenges with the people that you work with where it's like, okay, we're going to fly out to Denver because Denver has such and such, and maybe you say, no, I'd rather get a better story in Ranchester, Wyoming. Do you ever have little conversations like that?
Yes, we do actually have conversations like that, but we're all pretty much on the same page because at Thrillist, we do like to highlight, you know, we cover the Austins and the Chicagos and the San Franciscos, of course, but we definitely like to highlight cities that are underserved and surprising, because that's really what we do. We try to uncover hidden gems in, you know, places around you, but also entire cities that are underrated. That's always been a really big part of our business. So we're very aligned with that. Like, just even bringing it back to Oklahoma City, that was immediately something everyone agreed upon. You know, it's not the sexiest proposition, but it is something where it's like, wow, that is surprising and people should know about it. And that's kind of what people look to us for, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Jonas Brothers have a family restaurant in Belmont, North Carolina, which is the next city over. And now they've just announced they're going to open that restaurant in Las Vegas. And it's like, oh my God, Southern food out there, is it going to go over?
I don't know. I think it might. You know, my parents are in Wilmington, North Carolina. I don't know if you have a lot of experience down there.
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah, they just moved last year.
God, it's a gorgeous city, dude. It really is. To me, that was the Hollywood of the East Coast, because that's where all the studios were, and then before they all moved down to the Atlanta area. But yeah, that's a gorgeous town, man.
Great food there too. You know, that's why I was thinking about it. It's great Southern food.
That's where I ate shark for the very first time. Was in Wilmington.
Oh, really? Do you remember the name of the restaurant?
It was over there by the Battleship. So it was like before we were going to go on for the tour and stuff like that. But it was in that area, and it was like, and they let you eat right there on the water. I'm going, damn, this is the experience right here, eating shark on the water.
Amazing! I love that. I'm gonna search for that the next time I go down there to visit them.
Yeah, and they've got the craziest looking bridges and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, even with your podcast and stuff like that, you have this way of making those bridges come to life in our imagination without having to race to Google to see what it really looks like.
Right. And that's, I mean, painting, you kind of nailed it, like painting the picture and using audio, using textures, and using ambient sounds. And our editors do such a good job of blending this all together. You know, I can put everything in a script, but they're the people that really bring it to life and put music in there. They do a great job with that. And it's just, again, that's really the reason I love podcasting so much. It really brings these stories to life in a way that you can't do with an article.
Dude, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
I love talking with you. This is so fun. You're very, I thank you so much for all the kind words. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Yeah, you too, Ariel. Thank you so much.